Welcome back to Decide Your Destiny. This is going to be a little more personal of an interview for me because I actually met our guest today when we were in rehab together. It was my first time at a treatment center. I believe I was 15 years old, and our guest was assigned as like my big brother to show me how things worked. And since then, now he's 11 years sober. He's opened a sober bar named The Other Side. He's the president of New Directions Addiction Recovery Services, and I'm really excited to interview him today. Please welcome Chris Reed. Thank you for being here, man. I really appreciate your time.
No problem. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. It's crazy how things change, 11 years. Actually, that was longer than that. That was like 14 years, but
Yeah, that
good
was a
stuff.
while ago. So how are you today, man? Everything good?
Today things are good. It's there's a lot going on in my life. We have a ton of super exciting projects going on right now. And
I'm
I'm
excited to
happy to tell
dive
you
into them.
it's all every day is something new at the moment, but it's good, exciting time. It's a lot of stuff's coming to fruition right now, so it's fun.
That's awesome. I'm excited to dive into everything. I want to give people an idea about your story. I want people to know who you are and, everything that you've overcame, everything you've done. So let's kind of start from the beginning. Just tell people a little bit about like what your childhood was like, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I mean, without making that, going into my childhood and all, the growing up, it can be long, but the I think the best way to describe it, I grew up in a really normal household. My life was, I don't know, cookie cutter. I mean, I had good parents. I had a younger brother. I played sports, hockey, to be specific. And, I didn't really struggle with much. There wasn't anything catastrophic that happened in my life. It was pretty normal. It was easy for me to make friends. I think it was pretty mediocre in school. And yeah, I think the best thing to describe it is I was just felt a little different, like I felt like that everybody else had something figured out that I didn't have figured out internally. And it was like some missing puzzle piece, right? And I just identified with that at a very young age. And I think what that translated to for me was just being this like chameleon type person, right? Growing up in childhood, like I would just morph and do whatever I had to do to try and just like be okay in the moment and like find my spot with whatever social group or whatever like dynamic that I was trying to fit in at the moment, and just to kind of like make that feeling go away. And that's just the only thing that I remember, growing up with was just that feeling of just like missing something, right? And my whole high school, like I grew up in the Chicago suburbs in Algonquin, was really normal. I got into high school and my substance use started like middle school to eighth grade.
Was that
Um,
part of, so was when you started using drugs, was that part of this, like this missing piece that you felt like, did you start using drugs as part of the chameleon to like blend in with people and meet people?
I think okay, so I think that here what happened was like I was playing hockey and I was in eighth grade and we were like it was like after hockey tryouts, we all went over to somebody's house and they were drinking and I hadn't ever touched, a sip of alcohol, and it just like made sense. Like they were drinking, it wasn't like a peer pressure thing, it was just there. It looked pretty fun. There was a good chance we were going to get away with it, so we just like decided to do it, right? And for us, I think, or at least for me, so for me specifically, I really identified in that moment. I like remember it to this day with like this feeling of, oh, like relief almost, right? When I had like a couple shots in me and I had that like sense of, booze come over you and I just felt comfortable, right? And And I remember thinking, I'm going to do this like as often as I can. Like this is a solution to whatever's going on. I didn't really know what was going on, but I knew that that fixed it, right? Like a lot of my worries and troubles and problems seem to disappear with the effect produced by alcohol.
Yeah, it made you feel
And
good.
yeah, and I think for me more than others, and I don't think everybody identifies so strongly with that effect. And that translated for me to like smoking weed a couple days later, experimenting with like prescription pills like a couple days after that with like, Xanax and like Adderall and all this stuff. And for me, it was just like, okay, well, if this is good and this is good, what else is good? And so I really quickly was like on this chase to try and be okay with substances. And that's what started for me.
How quick would you say that progression was, like to where it went from you're just a high school kid, like experimenting, to this is unmanageable?
Um, yeah, it's hard to tell because it's fun for a while, right? There's not like getting in trouble, or like if you are getting in trouble, it's underage drinking tickets, or I mean, whatever. It's just like normal kid stuff. So I think that my use, I escalated it as quickly as I possibly could, right? Because I was just really seeking that effect in my life at that moment. But the invisible line that I guess you crossed, or where it turns into like dependency, and there's a lot of consequences associated with that, isn't it's not it's pretty hard to like put my finger on that, but I think it happened pretty quick, right? I started doing like harder drugs like cocaine and then like prescription opioids. I mean, within 6 months of like my first drink. And um, it wasn't so much drinking every day, but it was certainly smoking pot every day. And then on the weekends, it was just like whatever we could do, whether it was like ecstasy or cocaine or like whatever we get our hands on for that weekend is what we were doing. We're smoking weed. It was like a constant, right? Maybe we could get booze, right? And then maybe we could get some harder drugs. And that went like all through my freshman and sophomore year in high school, into my junior year. And then I think my junior year in high school is where things like started to become real. I started to leave school on a regular basis, like walk in the front door, walk out the back. Started selling drugs in order to like support this habit that we'd established. I think people started to identify me as, that guy in that group that was like kind of bad news, right? Or if you really want to get in some trouble, like call Chris, right? Or like those, like that's more and more the identity that I started to take on. But in reality, like I was just trying to be okay. I was just trying to like, fit in and still be okay and still somehow manage to live life. I got DUI like 2 weeks after I got my driver's license, which is what I believe landed me in an adolescent rehab with yourself,
Oh, what?
selling cocaine at 16 years old, selling like an ounce of cocaine a week. And, my parents wondering where all this money is coming from, and staying up for 3 or 4 days at a time. That had become pretty consistent in my life at like 15, 16 years old.
Okay, got it. And did you feel in that moment when you were 15, 16, getting into all this trouble, starting to get into all this trouble, did you feel like you had a problem? Like, did you know at this point you had a problem, or did you think something else?
No, I felt like it was totally normal, right? Like it didn't even enter into the realm of possibility that I could have like a real addiction problem. Like, one, just because I was so dead set on like, this was like my solution. This is what works for me. This is also the identity that I like this is like the crew of people that I thought I liked to be associated with, and I had just so much wrapped up in that, and that I refused to believe that like the substances were what was causing the issues. It was the people around me, right? It was people around me who like wouldn't let me do what I was doing. So I had to be sneaky, which is why I was getting caught, which is why I was being dishonest, which is why, right? Or the laws are rigged, and weed shouldn't be illegal. So I really shouldn't be getting these tickets anyway. Or, the list goes, you know, the list goes like on and on and on as to why the substances weren't the problem, and it was really just like the circumstances or people around me, right? My favorite thing is like, if
Yeah.
you would just leave me alone, right, I would be fine. Right? Like, that's just not
Yeah.
going to happen. That's not how life works. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's interesting what you say about the identity, because like looking back at my own life, when I was younger in high school, like you're talking about, you started selling drugs. Like I feel like when I was younger, I had this identity that I wanted to be a drug dealer. Like like when you're in high school, like you're 14, 15, 16 years old, like I identified myself as a drug dealer, and I was
Yeah.
like, this is awesome. I'm making money selling and doing drugs. And
Yeah.
when you're young, like, I don't know, maybe you think that's cool or whatever, looking back at it. And it's really interesting because looking at my life later on, changing my identity based on different things I want to do, I really haven't thought about it in the sense of being an addict until you just said this right now. Like switching my identity when I stopped using all those drugs, from being a drug addict, being a drug dealer, to now I'm not going to do drugs anymore. Now I'm not going to sell drugs anymore. That sounds like a really tough switch for somebody at any age to make, but let alone at a teenage age or at a young adult age. I mean, what do you think? What do you think was, well, let me ask you this question. You tried quitting multiple times. It's not like you just tried quitting
Yeah.
drugs and then when do you think that you started to feel like you had the problem?
So, well, I'll actually go back to that time in the adolescent treatment program. So I was certainly not ready to give up hope, right, that I could make substances use in my life. I thought that, hey, listen, this is all great, but I think there's probably a way that I can, smoke weed on the weekends, um, just drink, after I mow the grass when I'm older, and like those types of things. But although I had no experience doing any of that up to that point, right? I would never casually drink a beer or just socially smoke marijuana. I had no experience in that type of use, but in my head, I thought I would be able to achieve that at some point in time. But I left that facility with an understanding of what addiction was and what substance use disorder was. And although I didn't stay sober out of that, I was reminded, right, of what addiction was every single time that I used after I left that center, right? And just the twofold aspect of addiction, this mental obsession, right, and this physical allergy to substances, right? Like the allergy is what makes me different, right, than the average temperate drinker, right? Like when I drink to excess every time, no matter what, right? I develop a craving, and that craving happens, and it's like really hard to like satisfy that craving. And that usually results in me doing something stupid, blacking out, right? Stealing a car, like whatever it is. And it usually continues on. And the other half of that is this like mental obsession, right, that drives my life, like this thought that somehow, some way, I'll be able to make the use of substances work in my life, is an overwhelming thought, right? And drives so putting both of those together, leaving adolescent rehab and then participating in like using drugs and alcohol with the knowledge of that's what was happening to me, almost made my use worse, right? Because like now I knew what was happening, and I was trying to avoid it. I was trying to run from it and trying to pretend like I didn't have, a substance use disorder. But in reality, I had the definition of a substance use disorder, right? I couldn't stop once I started, and it was nearly impossible to get myself to stop myself from starting in the first place, right? So it was just this like vicious cycle. And for me, I mean, it all came to a head because I broke my leg in hockey, right? I was barely on the hockey team, but I broke my leg. I got a prescription, to oxycontin, and it was like a 90-day prescription. It was a bad injury, but didn't warrant 90 days of oxycontin. And I had abused those drugs before, and I really liked abusing those drugs because that was like the ultimate number, right? Like,
Yeah.
I didn't have to feel anything when I was on those, and that was the goal. But this was the first time like I had like a steady supply of them, and it got pretty
How
rough.
old were you here? How
I
old
was
were
like
you here?
16 or 17, right?
Okay.
Like, yeah, junior year in high school, like late junior year in high school, and things just like escalated. And for me, I became like physically dependent on the opioids. That was the first time I went through opiate withdrawal, and it was brutal, like the worst thing I'd ever experienced. And I like got through that, and I didn't want to tell my parents, like, because I didn't want them to know that I was like abusing these, because I had made up a bunch of lies, like I lost the prescription, I needed another one, and blah blah blah, right? So I was going through those, and by the end of it, I mean, deathly ill from this stuff, right? And I was like, I remember making this like resolution, like, hey, that was the worst thing I had ever been through physically. I'm never gonna touch that shit again. And then it was like one night at a party, somebody had a bunch of Vicodin, and that just like started the train all over again. And before I know it, right, I'm buying Vicodin, I'm stealing stuff in order to support me purchasing pills from people. And I got this physical dependency again. And this is like into my senior year in high school. And I'm just taking the pain pills and taking the pain pills. And one day it's just like, there's no way to get any. And I can't think of any other way. There's not a phone number I have in my phone that could like get me a pill. I've tried everything. And I knew that a couple of guys that I, would buy drugs from and do stuff, they were doing heroin, because it's basically the same thing, and that was one of the things. It's just like, their pills, I'll just never do heroin, right? Like, as long as I don't do heroin, I'll be fine. Well, when it came down to like being deathly ill again from opiate withdrawal, or doing like a $10 bag of heroin, like I snorted that bag of heroin so fast, right? Because I just, the things that I thought I would never do became so easy to do, right? And for me, like that first time doing heroin was producing the same effect as all the prescription pills, but a $10 bag of heroin lasted me like 4 days, like, and the effect was euphoric, right? Like, it's the ultimate number, right? You don't feel anything, and it's a pretty crazy feeling. And for me, and dealing with all the chaos and stuff I had going on in my life, it was like a welcome numb, right? And that I snorted heroin for like 30 days, and then very quickly moved to using it, intravenously, and then I shot heroin pretty much every day for the next 2 years, like automatically, and it like completely controlled, every aspect of my life. And yeah, so all of the craziness goes along with that. And all this time, I know now, I have the knowledge of going to this adolescent rehab, knowing that I have this problem, but now I'm just like trying to run away from it. And I've developed so much of my solution to life in that feeling of escaping through drugs and alcohol that I don't really think I could stay sober. Like, in my head, if you were to ask me if I thought I could put like a period of sobriety together, I would have told you like, no, like I genuinely don't think I can live life without substances, right? So yeah, and then that just like, and that went on for like 2 years, and I'm sure you don't know how that story ends, but it
Did you
was,
did you try quitting in between those 2 years, or was it just 2 years of just solid
I
going
mean,
at it?
there would be like half ass attempts, right? So like, I'm going to try and go to a psychiatrist and like maybe just smoke weed and take anti-anxiety medication, or I'm just going to drink on the weekends, or like I would try and getting sober was like not an option. I felt like, right. There had to be some way to keep substances in my life, but also not burn my life to the ground. This is what the ultimate goal was. And after like so many failed attempts, right, you start to realize that, hey, like the substances aren't going to work ever, no matter what. Like no matter what combination of stuff I try in my life, it's just not going to work. And I think a lot of people come to that realization, like, hey, substances are absolutely the cause of all these problems in my life, but it is what it is because I can't live without it, or I don't want to live without it. And for me, like, that's what it was. It's like, I didn't think I could really like be okay as a human being and not have substances in my life. And two, I just didn't think I could do it. Like, I didn't think I'd be okay, and I didn't think I could do it. So it was like, why even try, right? And so there was like 2 years of that, right? Heroin use and drinking. Like if I couldn't get heroin, I was getting blackout drunk, right? But heroin was absolutely the preferred,
Yeah.
substance. And there's a lot of consequences with that, like 30 days in Cook County jail and, multiple felony possessions. I, at one point, had like 10 court cases going on in 5 counties in the Chicago suburbs. I didn't graduate high school, right? I kind of did. I did. I walked at graduation, which is a funny story, but I'll tell you later.
That beats me.
And yeah, and, so my parents kicked me out like the day I turned 18, right? Because they couldn't, they just couldn't deal with it anymore. I went, I was couch surfing, so I just was like, so whoever I could manipulate for a couple of weeks at a time to let me stay with them is what I would do. And yeah, that just brought me to a point in like September of 2009 to where I was, part-time job hopping, right? So I would like work somewhere for 2 weeks, like as long as I could get them fooled, right? To let me work there, get one paycheck if I was lucky, right? And then go on a bender and then get a new job, find a new place to live. And yeah, it was the first time. I overdosed was in September 2009, and that was like probably like the single worst moment of like my life up to that point. And because I remember that so vividly, was like waking up in the immediate care because they'd given me a naloxone shot. There's people I was with had dropped me off and then called, right? So I woke up with like a bunch of doctors, nurses around me on the sidewalk outside of the front, loading up an ambulance. When you get the naloxone, you kind of go right into withdrawal because it relieves all that stuff from your, opiate receptors. And the thing that I remember most about that was that I when you get the wind knocked out of you, that's what that experience was for like 3 or 4 minutes because I hadn't been breathing for so long. So I was trying to like catch my breath. And it was brutal. Like, and at the same time, you're like kind of putting the pieces together as to what happened. And you're like, oh shit, like I almost died, and like all this stuff. And pretty awful experience. Do not recommend, and yeah. And
Is
the
that the
thing,
moment? Is that the only time you overdosed?
no, it's not. And I think the most baffling piece to that whole thing is that I remember in the hospital, or like in the ambulance ride to the hospital, being like, hey, I'm never going to do this again. Like, this is it. Like, I'm never going to do this. Like, I'm going to get it figured out. Like, I don't want to live life like this. I don't want to feel this way. I want a normal life. Right. And if you would have like hooked me up to a lie detector test, like in that moment, I would have been telling the truth. right? Like I never wanted to do it again. And, 8 hours later, I get out of the hospital, I get all my shit, right? Walk out, and like the only thing on my mind is getting high, right? It's like the only thing that I want to do. And like I can't shake the thought of it. And it was baffling. Like I couldn't even believe that like the obsessive kind of thoughts that could coincide with addiction and substance use disorder were that like powerful. Like I couldn't, and I think at that point I realized it was like, this was like way beyond what I could control, right? I was getting high or I was getting drunk whether I wanted to or not, right? And that's what I did, like that night I started doing heroin again. And 2 days later, I actually I overdosed again. And there was a girl that I worked with who used heroin too. And on breaks or at lunch, like I would go out to her car and use, and then I go back to work. And I overdosed in her car. And some lady putting away her groceries, right, like saw me in the car next to her and like called the ambulance. And the only thing I remember is the same thing, waking up in an ambulance again 2 days later on the way to the hospital. And you can just like imagine the thoughts. It's like the same exact experience. It's the second scariest moment of my life, and it's the same thing. But I'm thinking, hey, like I really, really am never doing this again. Like you can't be this lucky, all sorts of shit is run through my head. And yeah, 2 days later, or not 2 days later, about a day later, I got out of there. And I think I lasted like another maybe 24 hours. And it's the same thing. Like I couldn't shake the thought or the feeling or like the need to get high. And at this point, I didn't want to use, right? But I felt like I had to use. And I was in like a pretty rough spot, right? I'll wrap this whole thing up. But what ended up happening, it was like my moment or whatever, was that night, 2 days later, I got out. I went to pick up my check. I got caught stealing something from like a Meijer at 1 a.m, right? So I'm in jail, and this wasn't the first time I was in jail, and it wasn't that big of a deal. It was a retail theft. It was just like accumulation of all of this shit up to that point when I was 19 at this time. And I was just over it. Like I was just genuinely over the life that I was living. So, a buddy of mine bonded me out of jail, and buddy's a loose term, but a guy I knew bonded me out of jail, and primarily because I had drugs, that he could use. And I just I remember going back to the house to use drugs, to use heroin that night, and just being done, right? Done with this whole thing because, and I decided to intentionally overdose, right? And it wasn't like, I guess it was a suicide attempt because I was like totally cool if I didn't wake up, but I definitely used enough drugs to where I knew that I was going to overdose. And it wasn't, I think it's important that like I didn't want to die. So I didn't want my life to be over, right? But I also didn't want to feel the way that I was feeling with my life like anymore. Like I couldn't do it. And the thought of being sober was so impossible. Like it just didn't make sense. So it's like I knew I couldn't live life with drugs or alcohol anymore, but I also really didn't think I could live life sober. So it was like I can't go this way, but I also can't go this way. So this at the moment just seemed easier, and fortunately I woke up from that same situation. So this was like my third overdose in a week, and this time landed me in a psych ward for a few days because you die 3 times in a week. They tend to lock you up for a little bit. So I spent time in there, and there was this guy who had come to the adolescent rehab that we were at that I stayed in touch with, right? Here and there. And like he was a teacher at Dundee Crown High School, and like he would just like say, hey, how you doing? Like every couple months. And anyway, he shows up at this psych ward, and he just asked me like what he can do. And that was on a Friday. I got out. He picked me up. He took me to my parents. My parents let me stay there for the weekend. I actually ended up getting high on Friday and Saturday after both of those attempts, after all this craziness. And, I threw up like, I was not a spiritual or religious person, right, at any point in time, but I threw up this like foxhole prayer, right, on like Saturday night, like loaded on heroin, to just say like, hey, if there's a chance of me like making it in recovery, just like show me something and I'll go do it. Anyway, Sunday the 20th, this guy that I met in this rehab called me and said, hey, you want to go to a meeting? And I said, fine. I was like, whatever. At this point, I will go to an AA meeting or a 12-step meeting. And I went with him, and I went to this club in Crystal Lake, and there was like a ton of people there that I like really related to, like right off the bat. And I felt for the first time like very kind of like at home in that environment. And I wanted what some of these guys had, because they were clearly just like me, but they were living wildly different lives, right? They were very successful, like, and for me at that time, successful was like they had their own car, right? Like they paid for like coffee when we went out to coffee, like they had a girlfriend, whatever, and I was like, I want that, and that was the start of like recovery for me. I've fortunately been sober since I went to that meeting that day, like September 20th of 2009. And there's so much that goes into that, but it was primarily me being like pretty much as broken as I was capable of being broken, and also being lucky enough to be placed in a position to where there was like really good examples of people living life in recovery and like what that really looked like. And they were willing to show me like how to do that and how to follow that path in a way that would actually work. Right. And yeah, so I kind of like caught fire for this like recovery path, and worked through the 12 steps, and, really started to understand how to apply like the principles of recovery in my life to gain a different effect on outcome of my life. Right. And if I lived differently, I felt differently. Right. And if I felt differently, I didn't feel like I needed to drown everything out with drugs and alcohol, and yeah, and like that has grown and changed like so much over the past 11 years, and it's totally different than it was day one. But yeah, I don't know. That's what happened, man. Like that was like what happened, and like how I got started on this like path. And there's so many crazy things that have happened up to this point that are pretty cool. So.
Well, that is just, I knew your story a little bit, but I didn't realize the overdosing 3 times in a week. I mean,
overachiever.
it's crazy though, because it's just like the way that you explained it, there's something that is ruining your life, but at the same time, it's the only thing that you can think about. Like, it's just so crazy to go back to that thought. Like,
insane concept,
Yeah, I can't live with it. I can't live without it. And there's nothing to do right now except just do it, because it's the only thing that's going to stop me from thinking about living with it or without it.
For sure. Yeah, it's pretty pretty intense little setup. And like a lot of people will say, man, you got sober at 19, you didn't even have a chance. Like, I've never had a legal drink in a bar like ever in my life, right? And but like, yeah, I was about as broken as I felt like a human being could be broken, I mean, it just was where I was at. And at 19, like, that's just where I was. And I probably, if it wasn't for like the group of people that I connected with, I don't know where I'd be at today, but I probably wouldn't be here like talking to you about it. So
Do you think
I got
that
lucky.
this, do you think that that was the most, if you had to pick like one or top most important things that kept you sober that first year or the first even week or whatever? I mean, it sounds like every time you try to get sober, it didn't last longer than 24 hours. So what do you
Yeah.
think, what do you think made you last longer than 24 hours that time, if not just the rock bottom?
Um, I, I, I don't know. I really don't know. I think that there was like, I was motivated to do something differently. Let me take it back. I was too tired to fight it anymore. Right. I was like, I was just so exhausted with how I'd been living my life that I just didn't want to fight it. Like, I was like, fine, like, I'm going to try this. Right. If it doesn't work, like, I don't care. But if it does work, great. Like, I didn't have the energy to like be resistant to anything anymore. So it was like, if you told me, hey, go to a meeting every night this week, right? Make coffee when you get there and try and talk to a couple of people. I was like, fine. Right. And I would just go, I would just do it. Right. Regardless of what I thought about it, I just did it. And I think like that played a big role. And then I also got excited about it, right? Because I started seeing like other people. I started seeing examples of what this could look like. And I thought I was very alone in like the stuff that I had gone through. But then I started realizing that there were so many other people who had gone through the exact same stuff and were doing okay, right? So I had some hope, right? That like I wasn't like terminally fucked like with this thing. And yeah, so I think that was probably the two things.
All right, so I want to ask you one more question about, just you're going through addiction, and then I want to get into some of the things that you've done since getting sober. So, let's say that somebody right now has a friend or a family member that's struggling with an addiction. They're afraid for his or her life, and they just don't know what to do. What
Yeah,
would you say that they should do to try to help that person?
it's tough, man. I mean, and I with the work that I do now, I mean, that's like pretty much every day is um, has a conversation like this involved in it for me. But it's tough because nobody gives you a book on how to like handle somebody with substance use, and it is like such a painful thing to go through because whoever that is like hurting so many people along the way. But what to do? It's so like the first thing, like the most important thing is to like make sure that nothing that you're doing in your life is like helping that person continue to destroy theirs, right? And I mean, obviously people call that enabling, right? But it's like more than that. It's it's really a tool that a lot of people use to stay close to that person to make sure that they're okay. So for families, right? Maybe it's like you're paying their phone bill, right? And you're paying their phone bill because they can't pay their phone bill, and you want to be able to get a hold of them, right? Because you can't get a hold of them, you don't know where they are, you don't know what they're doing, you can't deal with like the anxiety of that, and that happens a lot with parents, right? But at the same time, like they're using that phone as their main source of getting drugs, right? Like that's how like all the communication happens. And for a lot of people with substance use disorder, right, addiction, is they need to come to the firm resolution, and this is what I had to do, that there's no possible way that drugs and alcohol are going to live in my life. Because even if there's like a sliver of hope, like I'm going to hold on to that and I'm going to continue to use and do the things that I'm doing until I'm forced to stop, right? So it's like the first thing is just make sure you're not like actively helping that person use drugs or alcohol, right? And for a lot of people, that means, not giving them money, right? Cutting them off for certain things. But at the same time is I think the difficult thing that a lot of people have is they have this idea that talking to somebody who's got a substance use issue is going to be this like DEFCON 5 crisis conversation. It's going to blow up, and it doesn't have to be, right? It really doesn't have to be. And the majority of the conversations that I have with people, they just revolve around like, hey, listen, like, you drink too much, you're using drugs, it's not working for you, right? I'm sure you don't want to be living life this way. And like, what can we do to support you? Like, what, is this where you thought your life would be, right? Is this really what you want? And if it is, great, right? Like, let me know when it's not. But more importantly, like, if it isn't what you want, like, let's work together to make sure that you have everything you need in order to like get past it. And if we treated it more like, hey, this is just like a condition, because it is, right? That some people struggle with, a lot of people struggle with, 2 out of 10 Americans have some type of substance use disorder. And you just have to treat it like the condition that it is. And if you don't treat it, it'll progressively get worse over time. And if you do treat it, it'll probably get better, right? You look at it like how we treat diabetes. It's like it's a lifestyle disease similar to that. And don't be afraid to have those conversations. And it doesn't have to be from like an accusatory standpoint or like you're a bad person or any of these things. It's just a thing that somebody deals with just like they would deal with any other condition. And it needs to get treated, and some people are going to need more support than others in order to like successfully manage it. So yeah, that's what I would recommend, and involve somebody who knows what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
Because somebody who doesn't know what they're doing is going to get eaten alive, right? By somebody who's in active addiction, because the tools that somebody who's actively using or drinking are like severe manipulation, dishonesty, right? Like,
Yeah, it's a great point.
So it's like, if you don't know how to work around those things, you can get caught in them. So
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a great point. Well, thank you for sharing that. I want to get into some of the things you've done since getting sober. And first, actually, I kind of want to understand how you went from overdosing 3 times in a week to creating all the things that you've created. So you started a sober bar named The Other Side. You've become the president of New Directions. And I kind of want to understand both of those things, what The Other Side does, what New Directions does, and how you got to the point where where you are right now. It's unbelievable, man.
Yeah. So yeah, okay. This is gonna be long, right? So just like strap in, because it's a long story. It's a story worth telling. And it started with when I got sober. I'm gonna tell you my pathway, right? So I just started like working with a couple guys that I got sober with. And what had happened was we were selling subscriptions to the Chicago Tribune door to door, which I was phenomenal at, right? Like, it was so good at doing for some reason. And it was like all of my bullshit tools that I had used, like figured out in like addiction, I was like able to apply it to sales. And anyway, I was just very good at it. And so I was selling newspapers door to door. That was going well. I met this guy while I was selling newspapers, and he had this like designated driver service, and it was really this is pre-Uber, right? So what we would do is he needed like another guy to come with him, because his little model that he had created is so somebody could go to the bar, right, drive themselves to the bar, and then they drink all night and do whatever they're going to do, and then we would come and pick them up in their car and drive them home, right? And I would follow him in his car behind whoever we picked up, and then I'd pick them up from their house. And so we were doing this like designated driver service, and we're doing that for like 6 months. And at this point, I'm like 9 months sober, like things are going good. I'm making like decent money, as much money as you can make selling newspapers door to door, and then like side hustle money and like on this like designated driver thing, which was fun. And it was kind of fun. And like I was, I was 19, so I was still like able to kind of go out and like, anyway. One night we met this guy and and he was like, "Hey man, you seem like a relatively like sharp guy. Like why are you driving a taxi, right, at 19 years old? Like, is this what you're going to do forever?" And I was like, "No, not really." And he's like, "Well, why don't you come for an interview with me in my construction company? It's a sales job. I think I could teach you and you could be pretty successful at it." And this was like my introduction to like the hail damage world. And I started working for this company, and within 3 months, like I was crushing it, right? It was like door-to-door sales again. And this time it was just like a higher level of door-to-door sales. And I had like written up 30 jobs in 3 months and it was like making a pretty decent living. And I had bought a truck and like all this stuff, and things were looking up. I was like a year sober. And what ended up happening with that was that this guy that hired me had left, and it seemed kind of weird. And then the owner of the company, I was owed almost 25 grand, right? I had all these roofs that were being built and final checks were coming in, but I wasn't getting my checks. And long story short, I ended up getting screwed out of like 25 grand. And at 19 years old, 20 years old, it was like the worst thing that could have possibly happened. I thought my life was over with, right? It was more money than I had ever like even thought I was ever going to have. And I was like so much looking forward to that and like having some financial security in my life for the first time ever. And it was just like gone. So I'm at like a meeting, I'm complaining about it, right? And I'm just like, it's the only thing I can talk about, right? And this guy goes, "Well, hey, listen, it sounds like," he was at the meeting. He goes, "Hey, I mean, I don't know anything about the business you're talking about, but it sounds like you're really good at it." He's like, "I got a general understanding about business. I've run businesses in my life. If this is something you want to sit down and see if you can try and do on your own, I'm willing to help you out." And so I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." Right. So I opened a construction company at 20, out of spite, almost, really, like out of anger. I knew nothing. I knew absolutely nothing. And but I started selling jobs, right? And I was a bullshit artist because people were like, "How long you been in business?" So I was like, family's been in construction for years, like it was just like, I was 20 and I had nice trucks. So that was like the only saving grace is it's like I had nice trucks. So people were like, "All right, well, maybe he's legit." And yeah, like the first 6 months of that, like we finished out the half of that year, and we did like $500,000 in sales, and things were like going good. I figured out how to do roofing, I figured out how to do siding, and then I like trained a couple guys in recovery to like do the same thing. We were all knocking doors, we were all selling jobs, and we were making good money. As we went into that winter, we're like, we need an office, and this was in 2009, 2010. And we also were doing property maintenance on bank foreclosures, right? So like there was a housing crisis, or so many foreclosures, like all this stuff was going on. So what we would do is we'd go in and like, winterize them, cut the grass, shovel the sidewalks on foreclosed properties for Bank of America. So we had these trailers and all this stuff. And so we leased an office in Crystal Lake, and that's where we kept we had our little construction office in the front, we had our warehouse in the back with all of our stuff. And then after that winter, as we were going into the spring, we actually lost the contract on the property maintenance stuff. And I was like, oh, this was like another moment where I was like, shit, like this sucks, because I just signed a commercial lease, which is something I had never done in my life, right? Like it was a big deal. It was $1,300 a month, which was like terrifying for me. And we lost this piece of the income. So, and now we're stuck with an empty warehouse too, right? And what ended up happening, I'll kind of bring this like full circle, right, is that everybody in like that I hung out with in recovery that had gotten sober, we just like started hanging out in this warehouse. And it became like, you know, it's just like 5, 10 of us, like on the weekends playing poker, hanging out there. You know, we brought a TV in there, we were watching games, we were just doing stuff in this like warehouse because there really wasn't anywhere to go. We were 20 years old, you know, in early 20s, like the group of us. We weren't going out to the bars, right? There was really no interest in doing that. You could only go to the movies like so many times, or like out to like the local breakfast cafe diner, right, before it gets old. And there was a lot of us, right? The group of, you know, young sober people in that area at the time was like, you know, 20, 30 people. So it's like you can't really go to somebody's house either. You don't have 30 people at your house every weekend. And that's what just happened. So we started hanging out at this warehouse and doing stuff to it. And we decided to start having like a sober party once a month at this warehouse. And by this time we had like put a hookah lounge in there. We had like a bar, you know, fridge full of energy drinks, you know, like a little stage and all sorts of stuff. And these parties started getting bigger and bigger. And they got to a point like after like 6 months where it was like we had like 100 to 150 people there like once a month, and like a DJ and or live music, and it was like it was fun. It was like yeah, we never really thought it would turn into anything, but it did. So what ended up happening is we got shut down by the city of Crystal Lake because you know, we didn't have like fire extinguishers. Like there was like nothing was like handicap accessible. There wasn't really a fire alarm system in the building like that was sufficient to have that many people. But to Crystal Lake's credit, they said, listen, we actually think this is like a cool thing that you guys are doing. We don't really think you're doing anything wrong. It's just the space that you're doing it in is not safe. And it's not zoned appropriately to do this type of use. And they said, if you want, we'll work with you and we'll try and figure out a way for you guys to do this. And we're like, okay, right? Have no idea what we're getting ourselves into. So they schedule a zoning hearing, right? So we got to like go up and like testify in front of the zoning board as to what we're going to do, what our plan is, all this stuff. And they approve it. They create a new zoning ordinance in Crystal Lake to be like a nightclub without booze. And they place it on this manufacturing building. Like, so it was really cool of them to like make an accommodation for us to do that. And it goes through city council. We get it approved at city council. And then we get kind of sent to the building department, and the building department said, hey, here's all the stuff that you're going to have to do in order to like bring the building compliant. And then we were like, shit, right? Because it was like 50 grand worth of stuff that we had to do. It was like a rooftop air conditioner unit. It was like a fire alarm system that was like hardwired into the city's grid. You know, commercial fire protection stuff. We had to put another bathroom in there. You know, everything needed to be like ADA compliant, push bars. You know, it was just a lot. And we were pretty much over it. We're like, all right, well, you could have told us it was going to cost us 50 grand to do this like 2 months ago. We wouldn't have done it. But the saving grace there was that at the city council hearing, there was a reporter. Her name was Amanda Marazzo, and she worked for the Chicago Tribune. And she just like loved the story. And she called us after that and was like, hey, listen, like I want to write a story about this. I want to see if like, you know, maybe we can help promote this a little bit. And it just kind of like escalated through the chains of the Chicago Tribune. And before we knew it, like some of the top editors over there like loved the story, and it ended up running on the front page of the Tribune, of the Chicago Tribune, on the Sunday paper, the day Obama got inaugurated for a second term. And it was legitimately Obama's inauguration article, like on the front half of the front page, and then the sober bar article. And like, that's one of the most circulated papers in Chicago Tribune history, right? And it went everywhere, right? So, wow. And then before we knew it, like we were on, you know, like Huffington Post had like picked it up, the Daily Herald, the Northwest Herald, and like we were in a different newspaper every single day. It ended
Chicago,
up
Chicago
Yeah.
Tribune rewarding you for all those amazing door-to-door sales.
Which is crazy how that comes full circle, right? But they, yeah, it ended up on Jimmy Kimmel, right? And Jimmy
Oh yeah,
Kimmel's
I
mom,
remember that.
like, it ended up, like Jonathan Brandmeier doing interviews with him. Like, we did an interview for Oprah magazine, like all of this stuff. And what ended up happening is we raised 50 grand in like 3 weeks from like checks from like all over the country would come in, you know, and and that's what started New Directions, right? Is because we were like, we don't even have an organization to deposit these checks into. Like, we couldn't even deposit the checks that were coming. We didn't even know what was going on. It happened so fast. So we started the organization. We had to create like DBAs in order to like cash the checks, you know, like, because people didn't know what to write checks out to. It was just like, anyway. So that happened, and that started. We were all fired up, you know. We were like 20 years old. This was like super exciting, and we were like, we're going to create this organization. I mean, New Directions Addiction Recovery Services, which actually was already a 501c3 that my buddy had started but never done anything with. So we just took that and we're like, you know, we'll just create programs underneath New Directions. And it'll be like this organization. We'll help a lot of people. It'll be great. So I'll fast forward a while because over the next, 5 years, really what we did is like, I um, I I kind of built my life, and I was continuing to run the construction company, um, and was just like doing community work, running the bar, and then the opiate epidemic really like was kind of crushing people's lives because that was coming to fruition. So we started doing things like naloxone training, and we were involved with like training the police departments to carry administer naloxone. So that was something that we like were focused on doing. And we just had this bar, and I think 5 years or so into it, I was kind of over it, right? Like I I was like paying for a lot of the stuff myself. I was like kind of funding this, and the bar was a lot of work. Like it was like a real thing that we had to like manage. Like it wasn't there was enough people there on a regular basis to where it wasn't something that we could just like pass keys out to anymore and self-govern. And I just had my second kid, and I was like kind of just ready to not do it anymore, because we were doing like the worst type of fundraisers, like bake sales and car washes and like raffles, and like it was brutal, in order to do that. And anyway, I was sponsoring this guy, and he was a younger guy, and we were at our board meeting. I was talking about shutting the bar down. I was talking about shutting everything down because I was tired. I was over it. It had been 5 years. It was too much work. And this kid was like, hey, my dad's company is in the community, and like they donate a lot of money to places, like maybe he'll set something up. And I was like, yeah, all right, whatever. Well, his dad called me like a month later and was like, hey, our owners are in town. And, I told him a little bit about what you're doing, and they're interested in like meeting with you and hearing what you have to say. So I went into this company, went into this boardroom, and like I'm talking to these guys, and they called me like 20 minutes after I left, and they're like, hey, listen, like we want to give you like 20 grand just to like start off, pay some bills, like hang out, relax a while. We'll pay our corporate strategic planners to come in and like help you guys build some mission, vision, values around what you're trying to do, and like put a strategic plan together. And we wanted to pay for you to go through this leadership program in McHenry County that'll help you like establish and get the connections that you need in order to make this successful. And it was like, I remember I was in the Jewel parking lot, I literally broke down in like tears because it was like so exciting. I mean, it was so crazy. It was the most we had ever raised. And they're like, after you go through all that, we'll follow up in like 6 months, and we'll try and figure out a way to make this whole thing sustainable so that it works and it's in the community for a while. And so I go through this leadership program, which was a wonderful experience. I learned like so much about, myself and like how to really leverage relationships in the community and like how to be a part of the community and how to like lead a group of people, especially in the nonprofit world where they're really just volunteers, and how to get like the most out of that. And anyway, so we followed up in 6 months, and they had asked me to come together with a plan, which what I thought was a good plan was if they could maybe like co-sign for like a loan on the property for us, or help us with like a down payment or like a bank relationship so that we could buy a house and we could do sober living. And if we did that, then the rent that the guys were paying would help fund the organization as a whole, and we'd be able to increase our capacity, start a new program, and eventually be able to grow that. And they said, hey, listen, we think that's a great plan, right? But we think you need 2 houses and you should really just own them, right? And I was like, okay. So long story short, they ended up buying 2 houses for us, and outright in Crystal Lake. And it was like the most incredible thing that I've ever like witnessed or happened in my life. And yeah, so we opened a male and female sober living house, and we were able to get that off the ground in like a short period of time. And it's great because we own the houses outright. It's property tax exempt, and really all the money that's generated from those houses for guys and girls paying rent comes right back to them in the form of like services. And that was in 2016, 2017. And then 2018, which was really great, was that I think that happening, it really placed us in a position. We actually asked the county if they'd be willing to help us with a 3rd house. And they did. We got a grant for $220,000 in 2017 to purchase a 3rd house, which became our 3rd house. And so now we've got 28 beds, sober living beds. We also have some county funding in our homes. So we've got full-time case management and recovery coaching. And we provide food and transportation. And it's some of the most affordable, high-quality sober living in like the Chicagoland area. All the houses are super nice, fully remodeled. And we've got these 3 houses. So the whole time, like we got the bar, that's going on. We open up these 3 sober living houses, and now things are even more different. I work really closely with the McHenry County State's attorney, and he is a big supporter of recovery. And one of the big gaps in the recovery community is that 1 out of 10 people who struggle with substance use disorder actually have access to the treatment that they need, right? And that's primarily because it's somebody with substance use is often uninsured or underinsured, and the resources for that demographic are not very good. And so what ends up happening is a lot of people who need help can't get help, or they get stuck on a wait list and they can't just get access to the care they need. So there's models that have kind of popped up where they're kind of peer-to-peer programs, where it's just like people in recovery taking other people through recovery. And we decided we want to try and do that in McHenry County. And we kind of sat down and started talking to people in 2018, made some progress. We had a couple families commit, some serious money to us. And what ended up happening was the homeless shelter in McHenry County was looking to move to a new facility, and they had raised about $600,000, and they needed $1.2 million in order to move this new homeless shelter. And the old homeless shelter building actually worked perfect for like what we were trying to do. So we turned up our fundraising efforts And then the county stepped in again, and the county said, hey, listen, we think this is a really good opportunity to fill some huge gaps in the area. So what they did is they provided $675,000 to us to purchase the old building for the old homeless shelter. And that number, with the money that the homeless shelter had already raised, got them to their 1.2 million mark, right? They opened a brand new 80-bed homeless shelter, right? We got the old homeless shelter, and it's like right now we're in the process of renovating it. It'll open, around Christmas, and it'll be like a 35-bed sober living campus. And we raised like just under $1 million, and it's going to be pretty cool. So we'll go from 28 beds, to 62, 65 beds at New Directions. And that would be enough, right? Like that would be enough of going on. But in 2019, we ended up applying for a grant, which we got for just under $500,000 to move the bar. And we didn't necessarily think we'd get it, but we got it. So right now we're in the process. We just moved the bar from the old warehouse location to a spot in downtown Crystal Lake. And it's incredible. I mean, it's like, it used to be an art studio, but it's going to have like a real bar, TVs, separate meeting space, access from the train. We're going to be able to employ people full time who are in recovery. We'll have we'll have draft taps and everything, like with non-alcoholic drinks, and coffee bar during the day, but also space to like lounge and hang out, at night, watch the games. And it's just a really exciting time. And it's really just like blossomed into this thing that was like, one, it's so much bigger than me personally, because, I would have never drawn that up, there's no way I would have been like, hey, I'm going to have this guy like screw me over from some money, and then I'm going to rent a warehouse. I'm going to start my own construction company, which is going to turn into a sober bar, which is going to like do this and do that. Like it all just like has come together, and it's, one of the larger nonprofits in McHenry County now. And it's super cool to be a part of. It's super fun to watch. And like now's a fun time, we've got a lot of stuff going on. And somewhere along there past year, I opened a treatment center up here too. So it's, which is probably my greatest achievement up to this point, which I could tell you more about, but it's
I do want to hear about that. I just got to say, first of all, thank you for what you're doing for everybody. It's
that was a long story, right?
Well, it was a long story, but it was an unbelievable story. And here's the other thing about it. Like, first of all, everything you're doing for the community and for the sober, it's amazing. You've helped so many people. But what is really intriguing to me is that you seemed like you've never seemed prepared for what you're going into, from what you're telling me. From getting sober, you weren't prepared, to starting the construction company, you weren't prepared, to starting the bar, you weren't prepared, you never felt prepared. But the point is, you forced yourself to do it. You went in, you believed in yourself, and look at what has happened from all of those things. Look at how many people's lives that you have touched because of that initial time where you just said, I'm going to do it even though I don't know how to do it. And I bring that up because this podcast, I have all sorts of guests. We talk about all sorts of things, and so many people let their own doubt or their own feelings or their own, I'm not prepared for this, or I don't know how to do this, their lack of knowledge stop them from actually pursuing something or actually taking action on something. And I just want to point it out because you've literally told me 5 times in the last few minutes of 5 separate instances where you didn't feel prepared, but you went on anyway. And look at what has happened from you doing that. So I really wanted to point that out.
I think I would feel more uncomfortable if I did have a plan. Right? Like at this point.
I love that.
I mean, it really is. I mean, I think that for me, I've just tried to remain as like open-minded, because it's like this opportunity wouldn't be placing itself in front of me if it wasn't for a reason. And I believe in that, on some level, that like that stuff happens for a reason, right? And And then I do have just like a weird blind confidence that it'll just work out somehow, right? I don't know where that comes from, but I think that definitely attributes to like being able to just kind of like send it on a lot of these things. And yeah, and I had a moment like that. So what happened in my life is I was kind of getting beat up by the construction company, right? Because it wasn't something I was super passionate about. It's like I paid the bills, and yeah, it was what it was. But I didn't love roofing, right? And on the other side, like I had this like nonprofit that I also didn't work for, but it was like becoming more and more. This is not like a hobby anymore. Like this is a real organization, and that's where my heart was, and that's where my passion was. It's where I wanted to be. It's where I wanted to spend my time, and couldn't, because I had this like construction company that I had to participate in order to like allow me to do the things I really like to do. And a buddy of mine that I had gotten sober with had, I'd reach out to him because he worked for a consulting firm, and I was like, hey, do you think, you could help me maybe put a plan together to try and open up a treatment facility in McHenry County outside of the nonprofit, something that I could work for, right? And, build my career around, build my livelihood around, not have to take some salary from the nonprofit, and be that guy who's like raising a bunch of money, but also taking a bunch of money out of the nonprofit for himself. Like the thought of that, like I couldn't even fathom. So I just stayed as far away from it as I could. And anyway, so, the more and more we started talking about it, he came up here and he kind of saw everything that had built with like the nonprofit and just like the foundation, how that was all working. And he kind of got all sauced up about the idea, and we ended up partnering. And they had a couple of facilities out west in Portland and Tacoma, Washington, and kind of just took that model and raised some capital. And we were able to fund the project here. And we opened Northern Illinois Recovery Center, which does outpatient treatment services and sober living, like integrated together. And we opened that in June of 2019. I shut the construction company down in December of 2018, and took a gamble, and because I didn't really have a backup, like, and it worked. So it grew very quickly. So we opened the doors in June 2018. We planned on maybe, scaling to 12, 24 beds. At the end of the first year, we were at 24 beds at the end of the second week. And, we started off with 12 employees. Month one was 30 employees. And, a year and a half in, we've got 55 beds here, 6 houses at the treatment center. I think 67 employees right now.
Wow.
And we're working on adding levels of care and, other just services that wrap around this. But yeah, between this, New Directions, which is the nonprofit, by spring we'll have, we'll have added about 126 beds of either treatment or supportive living in McHenry County in the last 3 years. So pretty crazy. And yeah, I'm sitting in my own office now, which is great, and it's pretty remarkable, and it's a great company, and we've got an awesome culture, and we're primarily run and operated by people in recovery, which is really impactful. And yeah, we're doing a good job, and it's fun to be a part of. And it's crazy that my life is here right now and all these crazy things going on, but it's good stuff. So
it's all good stuff. It's unbelievable, man. Well, let me ask you this. For anybody listening right now who may want to get in touch with you or just follow you or reach out to you about, addiction help, where can they find you?
So I just always put my cell, right? I mean, anybody can call me on my cell 24 hours a day. It happens all the time. So 847-307-1143. I'll give that to you so you can put a little graphic up there.
I'll put it up on the screen.
Call me, and then, put my, some people are more comfortable like reaching out on social media, which I can like get you some of those tags and it happens a lot, but don't hesitate. I mean, I might not know specifically what you're going through or what the situation is, but there's not many things that shock me at this point. So, and it's like, honestly, I really enjoy having that in my life. There's nothing that like keeps me going and keeps me like grounded and sane and on my own path of recovery than like helping others navigate theirs. And it's just a constant reminder of, what my life used to be like, and there's a lot of purpose and value for me that I get out of like having those conversations. So you might be helping me out more than I'm helping you out. So I encourage you to make that call.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. I got one more question for you.
Yeah, let's do it.
So if somebody is feeling stuck right now, you've just described so many different instances in your life where you didn't allow yourself to get stuck, where many people would have maybe gotten stuck. So I just kind of want to hear, like, if somebody ran into you, asked you for a few minutes of advice or a minute of advice on how to create some momentum in their life if they're feeling stuck, whether they're trying to get sober, whether they're trying to start a business, whether they're trying to lose weight. I think it all comes down to something similar with, your mindset. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how to get unstuck.
Yeah, okay. So the one thing that I've learned, right, is that I am probably like my own worst enemy a lot of the times, right? And that if there's something going on that I'm not okay with, right, it's probably because at some point in time, I like made a decision that placed myself in that position, right? So one is like, I don't know, it's hard to like create identify an example of that, but like for me, it's like I got to get out of my own way first, right? And sometimes that's like surrounding myself with people who can like keep me accountable, which is tough to do, right? Because I need to be held accountable by people that I want to be held accountable by,
Yeah.
And like not easy to find. So it's like building up that group of people in your life is super important because they can see some of the shit that I'm doing, right? That's not in my best interest, or that's not going to get me where I want to be the fastest before I can,
Mm-hmm.
And having those relationships in my life are by far some of the most valuable things that I've ever done, is like having those connections and having those relationships. And I think that the thing that stops a lot of people, and sometimes stops me too, is the like, what if mentality, like what if this happens? What if that happens? Or, well, if I do this, well, maybe then this happens. It's like, you don't know. Like, you don't know in any way, shape, or form. Like, I haven't known anything that's going to happen. And to be honest with you, I'm glad that I didn't, right? Because if you would have asked me when I was 19 what I would have wanted in life, I promise you it wouldn't have been owning a treatment center. It wouldn't have been, creating a community organization that serves a lot of people. It wouldn't have been, having 2 kids. Like, it wouldn't, like, I would have sold myself short, right? Like, the things that I would have thought I would wanted or thought I was capable of would have been a lot smaller, And so I think that's probably like, is like abandoning that thought process of like how things are going to pan out somehow or some way, because you don't. Nobody does. It's impossible to figure out. So it's like, might as well not even try. So, and then just do it. So
I love it.
Yeah, there's some philosophical points that I could sneak in there too, like doing the right thing for the right reasons, I believe will work out every time, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Doing the right thing for the wrong reasons, you might be able to pull off, right? But maybe not. But I think that like when you do something and you've got like pure intentions, and especially if like you're doing it to serve other people, you know, in your life and create value for others, like it'll always work out, you know?
Yeah. Man,
Yep.
that's amazing advice. I love it. It's one of the best things I've heard said. Seriously. Thank you so much, Chris. It's been awesome, man.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry, my phone's blowing up, so that's why I keep going in and out.
That's
So,
okay. That's okay. Well, thank you
hey,
so
we'll talk
much.
again soon, and you should come out here and see some of this shit. It's
I
pretty
would
cool.
love to. I will. I absolutely. I would love to do that. Let's figure it out. We'll talk right after this.
Yeah, sounds good, man.
Thank you so much, man. If you got value out of this episode, please subscribe and share. It would mean a lot to me. Otherwise, have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.